I never imagined a single sentence could unravel everything I thought was stable. It happened the night Ava looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Your family is not my problem." Something in me froze, like the ground shifted beneath my feet. I didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't even understand the full weight of what she meant. Not yet. But that moment planted a crack right through the center of our relationship. A crack that would split wide open the second my younger brother reached out for help. Because while I was trying to balance love, loyalty, and responsibility, Ava made it painfully clear she would never lift a finger for anyone who shared my blood. And I had no idea that her words, so cold, so final, were only the beginning of a storm that would tear our lives apart in ways neither of us could have predicted. Ethan called me late at night, his voice thin and trembling like he was trying not to break. He told me he had lost his job that morning. Then his apartment. Then everything else that held his life together. For the past week, he had been sleeping in his car behind a half-shut grocery store, washing up in public restrooms, and skipping meals to save what little money he had left. He didn't ask for much. Just 30 days under my roof, so he could breathe, regroup, and get back on his feet. I told him yes before he even finished his sentence. But the moment Ava overheard us talking, the temperature in the room dropped instantly. She crossed her arms, stared at me like I had just betrayed her, and said flatly, "No, absolutely not." I asked her to at least listen, to understand the situation, but she cut me off before I could explain. "His problems are not coming into this house," she said. "He's your family, not mine." Her voice was sharp, cold, final. I tried to stay calm, tried to reason with her, but she only grew more rigid the more I spoke. She said that bringing Ethan in would disrupt her peace, that she didn't want drama, that she had worked too hard to keep her life clean to let someone else's mess spill into it. When I reminded her that he was homeless and sleeping in a car, she shrugged as if that detail had nothing to do with her. Then she said the one thing that made my stomach twist. "If you can't respect my boundaries, then maybe we need to reconsider this relationship." I stared at her, unsure whether she was serious or just threatening me to get her way. But the look in her eyes told me she meant every word. I felt torn clean down the middle, between the woman I thought I would spend my life with and the brother who once shared a bedroom with me when we were kids, the brother who had no one else to turn to. Ethan apologized when I called him back, as if he was the one causing trouble. As if asking for help made him a burden. He said he could figure something out, maybe sleep in his car a little longer, maybe take extra shifts once he found anything at all. Hearing him try to minimize his own suffering made something tighten in my chest. This wasn't a choice. It wasn't a dilemma. It was my brother. And no matter how much Ava pushed, threatened, or tried to manipulate the situation, I couldn't turn my back on him. But Ava didn't soften. She didn't waver. She just watched me, waiting to see whether I would obey or defy her. That night, for the first time, I realized just how conditional her love truly was. And that was the moment the real fracture in our relationship began, quiet, invisible, but impossible to undo. The next morning, before the sun even came up, I drove to the grocery store parking lot where Ethan had been sleeping. When I saw him curled in the backseat with a jacket for a blanket, something inside me twisted. He tried to smile when he noticed me, but his eyes were exhausted in a way I had never seen before. I told him to grab his things, that I'd booked him a room at a small motel nearby. He resisted at first, embarrassed, worried about the money, but I insisted. He finally nodded, relief softening the tension in his face. When we checked into the motel, he stood there in the doorway for a moment, taking in the clean sheets and the working shower like they were luxuries. He thanked me quietly, over and over, but I didn't need thanks. I just needed him safe. Over the next few days, I helped him rewrite his resume, bought him a few clean shirts, and drove him around to interviews. He showed up early to everyone, determined not to waste the chance. The Ethan I knew, hardworking, optimistic, loyal, slowly started resurfacing. But the moment I got home, everything turned sour. Ava would be waiting in the living room, arms crossed, jaw tight, acting as though I had committed some unforgivable betrayal. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just simmered with this quiet anger that filled the room like smoke. She'd ask questions framed as accusations. How much money are you wasting on him? How long are you planning to keep this up? Are you trying to turn our lives into chaos? No matter how calmly I answered, she never listened. To her, the problem was Ethan. The problem was me daring to help him at all. One night, when I came home after dropping Ethan off at a job fair, Ava confronted me with a harshness I hadn't seen before. She said I was choosing my brother over her, that she felt disrespected, that she shouldn't have to compete with my family for my attention. I told her it wasn't a competition. I told her Ethan was homeless, and I was simply doing what any decent brother would do. But she didn't budge. She said she felt excluded, even though she was the one shutting every door. It became clear she didn't want a solution. She wanted control. Still, I refused to let her resentment derail what Ethan needed. I visited him every day, cheered him on through interviews, helped him practice responses, and reminded him of who he was before life hit him this hard. Then, only 3 weeks after losing everything, he finally got an offer. A steady job. A fresh start. A chance to climb back out of the hole he'd been shoved into. He hugged me like he was afraid to let go, thanking me for not giving up on him. But when I got home to share the good news, Ava didn't congratulate him. She didn't even pretend to care. She just rolled her eyes and muttered, "Great, maybe now this whole thing can finally stop being an issue." And standing there, listening to her dismiss the struggle my brother had barely survived, I felt something shift inside me. A quiet recognition that the woman I loved was beginning to show a side of herself I could no longer ignore. A week after Ethan started his new job, life finally felt calm again, at least on my side. Then everything shattered when Ava burst into the living room one evening, phone in hand, her face pale and frantic. She told me her sister Lydia had been arrested for DUI. Not just arrested, she had crashed into a parked car, panicked, and tried to run. The police caught her a few blocks away. Ava's voice shook as she explained the charges, the fines, the possibility of jail time. Then she said the words he had never once said during Ethan's crisis. "We need to go, now she needs us." I stared at her, stunned by how quickly she expected me to drop everything. There was no hesitation in her tone, no doubt, no consideration for anything else happening in my life. Just an assumption that her family automatically came first. She grabbed her purse, expecting me to follow behind her like always. But something in me hardened. I remembered Ethan sleeping in his car. I remembered Ava's cold stare, her refusal, her threats, her declarations that family problems didn't belong in our home. So I took a slow breath and repeated her own sentence back to her. Word for word. "Your family is not my problem." The look on her face was instant and explosive. A mix of disbelief, betrayal, and fury twisted together like a storm forming behind her eyes. She asked me if I was joking. When I stayed silent, she stepped closer, voice rising with panic. "She's my sister. You're supposed to care. You're supposed to help." But all I could think about were the nights Ethan cried from exhaustion, and how she never once offered even a bit of compassion. All I could think about was her telling me that helping my own brother was crossing a boundary. So I told her calmly that I was honoring the exact boundary she had set. She stared at me as if I had physically struck her. Then she started packing, running her hands through her hair, muttering that this wasn't the same, that Lydia was like that I was twisting her words. But I wasn't twisting anything. I was holding up a mirror. And she hated what she saw. She tried a different approach, softening her voice, reaching for my hand. She said Lydia was scared, that she needed support, that family should stick together in hard times. And hearing her use those words, the same words I had pleaded with her to consider when Ethan was homeless, made my chest burn. For a moment, I almost felt guilty. Almost. But then I remembered how she made me feel small for protecting my own brother. How she acted like compassion was an inconvenience. So I pulled my hand back and told her I hoped her family figured things out, but I wouldn't be involved. That sentence broke something in the air between us. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared at me with a cold, wounded expression that told me a new war had begun. A war she never expected to lose. And in that moment, I realized the real problem had never been my brother. It had always been her double standards, and the moment she needed help, those standards came crashing down around her. Lydia's situation spiraled faster than Ava could keep up with. By the next morning, the charges were laid out clearly, and none of them were small. A DUI with property damage, attempted evasion, possible jail time, depending on the judge. The moment Ava realized Lydia needed an attorney, she shifted into full panic mode. She paced the kitchen, mumbling figures under her breath, scrolling through law firms, calling people who didn't pick up. Then she finally looked at me and asked if I could help cover the lawyer's retainer, $10,000 up front. Her tone wasn't angry or condescending this time. It was pleading, shaking, almost desperate. But the memory of Ethan sleeping in his car was still raw in my mind. The memory of her dismissing him, like he was nothing, still sat heavy in my chest. So I told her no. Calmly, plainly, directly. She froze, staring at me as if she couldn't comprehend what she'd heard. She reminded me that Lydia was family, that she needed support, that this was serious. But every argument she made was the exact argument I had used for Ethan, and she had shut me down without hesitation. I told her I wasn't being cruel. I was simply respecting the rule she set. Her voice broke when she said, "You're really going to do this?" I didn't raise mine. I didn't try to hurt her. I simply repeated the boundary she was so proud of. "Your family issues aren't my responsibility." She stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. I thought that would be the end of it, but soon her parents started calling. First her mother, then her father, wanting to know why I wasn't helping, why I wasn't supporting their daughter during a crisis. At first, I tried to keep things neutral. But they kept pushing, kept assuming I was the one being unreasonable. So I told them the truth. I explained what had happened with Ethan. How he had been homeless. How Ava refused to let him stay, even one night. How she threatened to reconsider our entire relationship if I dared to help him. There was a long silence on the phone after that. Then her father sighed, the disappointed, exhausted kind of sigh that said he wasn't surprised. He told me he'd talked to Ava. When I hung up, Ava emerged from the bedroom, her face red and furious. She demanded to know what I had said to her parents. I told her the truth, the whole truth, since she had no problem exposing me as the uncaring fiancé to them. Her expression twisted into something I had never seen before. Not just anger. Humiliation. Fear that her carefully crafted image had cracked open. She yelled that I had made her look bad. I told her she didn't need my help with that. The truth alone was enough. For the first time since the argument began, she didn't have a comeback. She just stood there breathing hard, trying to decide whether to blame me or finally look inward. And as much as she wanted to deny it, she knew now that her family understood exactly who she had been all along. The mask had slipped, and there was no putting it back on. The fallout began faster than either of us expected. 2 days after the truth reached her parents, Lydia's employer found out about her arrest. Someone had taken a screenshot of the donation post she'd put online, the one begging strangers for money to cover legal fees, and forwarded it to her company. By noon, she was fired. Ava received the news while sitting on the couch, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. When she told me, her voice cracked, and for a brief second I thought she might finally see the connection between the choices she made and the consequences hitting her family. But instead of reflecting, she exploded. She started packing the living room, knocking over a lamp, slamming cabinet doors, muttering that everything was falling apart because no one cared enough to help. What she meant, of course, was that I didn't care enough. She spun around and pointed at me like I was the one who got her sister arrested. "She needs you," she shouted. "Why can't you just be there for her?" I stood still, letting her anger crash against me, because deep down, I knew she wasn't grieving her sister's mistake. She was grieving her loss of control. I reminded her that I had tried to be there for my family, and she was the one who slammed the door shut. But she didn't want to hear it. She accused me of being cold, selfish, uncaring, twisting reality into a version where she was the victim, and I was the villain who abandoned her. Then came the ultimatum, the second one she'd thrown at me in less than a month. She said if I didn't help Lydia right now, then our relationship was over. The words hit the air like a hammer, but they didn't hit me the way she expected. There was no shock, no fear, just a strange, steady calm. Because the truth was, I had already watched our relationship die the night she left my brother to freeze in his car. Still, I asked her one question. "Would you have helped Ethan?" She froze. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked everywhere but at me. The silence that followed was louder than any argument we had ever had. She couldn't say yes. And we both knew it. That was the end. She stormed into the bedroom, tore open drawers, stuffed clothes into suitcases with shaking hands. Every movement was violent, a physical attempt to drown out the guilt she refused to acknowledge. When she dragged her bags to the door, she didn't say goodbye. She just glared at me like I had ruined her life by refusing to clean up the mess she helped create. Then she left, slamming the door behind her hard enough to rattle the picture frames on the wall. For a few minutes, the silence felt heavy, sad even. But then something unexpected happened. A few hours later, Ethan knocked on my door with a small bag of groceries, smiling in that shy, grateful way he always does. He asked if he could stay with me until he found a place of his own. I told him yes, without hesitation. And for the first time in weeks, the apartment felt warm again. Peaceful. Honest. Ava was gone, and everything she had been fighting so desperately to control slipped right through her fingers. Meanwhile, the brother she wanted me to abandon was the very person who helped bring stability back into my life. It was impossible to ignore the truth anymore. Loyalty builds a home. Selfishness burns it down. Ava didn't stay quiet for long after she moved out. Within a week, she started posting vague messages online about being betrayed and supporting a partner who refuses to grow. At first, people sympathized with her because they only heard one side. But when she realized pity wasn't enough to fuel her outrage, she began telling specific stories, warped versions of the truth that painted me as heartless, controlling, and emotionally distant. Friends who barely knew me reached out asking what was going on. I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. I didn't feed the fire she was trying so desperately to ignite. But she pushed harder. She messaged mutual friends privately, twisting events until even I barely recognized them. She told them I abandoned her family, conveniently leaving out the part where she abandoned mine first. She said I did nothing for Lydia, omitting the fact that she refused any compassion toward Ethan when he was homeless and terrified. But the turning point came when she tried to use a voice recording she had secretly made, except she didn't realize I had recordings too. Recordings of her telling me flat out that my brother wasn't welcome. Recordings of her threatening to leave if I dared to help him. Recordings of her mocking the idea of family loyalty until it applied to her own. So when a close friend confronted me with Ava's accusations, I calmly sent him the truth. Just one recording. Just one moment of her cruelty, raw and unfiltered. That was all it took. Within hours, the narrative flipped completely. People who defended her began distancing themselves. Friends she'd relied on for sympathy stopped replying. By the next day, the only people still supporting her were the ones who hadn't heard the recording yet. When she realized her lies were collapsing, she tried reaching out to me directly. Her first message was angry, accusing me of exposing her. When I didn't respond, her tone softened, then softened again. By the third message, she was apologizing, not for what she did, but for how things got out of hand. She asked to meet in person. I ignored it. 2 days later, when Ethan and I were packing boxes in the apartment to move into a new place, there was a knock at the door. Ava stood there, hair messy, eyes tired, wearing the same hoodie she used to sleep in. She said she didn't want to fight anymore. She said she missed me. She said we could start fresh, that she'd do better, that this whole thing had been a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But her voice cracked when she looked past me and saw Ethan stacking boxes in the living room. She realized instantly that she had already been replaced in the space she once controlled. She begged me to talk outside. So I stepped into the hallway, keeping the door mostly closed behind me. She reached for my hand, but I pulled back gently. She asked if we could try again. I told her no. Not out of anger. Not out of spite. But because everything she wanted now was only because she lost, not because she learned. She only believed in boundaries when they benefited her. Only believed in family first when it was her family. And only believed in teamwork when she was the one receiving, not giving. She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes filling with the realization that the door she walked out of was no longer hers to return through. Then she left without saying another word. I watched her walk down the hallway, small and quiet in a way I had never seen before. Not destroyed, just confronted with the truth she had been running from. Inside, Ethan handed me another box and asked if I was okay. I told him honestly that I was. For the first time in a long time, I truly was. Because sometimes peace doesn't come from saving a relationship. Sometimes it comes from finally letting the wrong one end. In the weeks that followed, the silence between Ava and me grew into something solid, something neither of us tried to break. I kept waiting for her to acknowledge her part in everything, to show even the smallest sign of regret, but she never did. Instead, she moved through the apartment like a guest passing through a place she no longer cared about. I realized then that the version of us I had been fighting so hard to protect existed only in my memory. The real version, the one built on cracks, distance, and unspoken resentment, had been collapsing long before the final argument. One night, I packed a single bag, left my keys on the counter, and walked out without waking her. There was no dramatic goodbye, no final confrontation, no last attempt to fix what had already died. Just a quiet acceptance that sometimes love doesn't fail all at once, but slowly, quietly, until there's nothing left to hold on to. And in that stillness, I finally understood that letting go wasn't a loss. It was the first real act of honesty either of us had made in a long time.